Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Last Honest Realtor. I'm your host, David Fleming. We are approaching the end of the year, and as such, we have to decide when are we going to do our last podcast. Well, if I am playing off of Toronto Realty blog, I will probably do year-end content, some sort of year-end podcast, a year in review, which means, again, not to sound unoriginal, but every year on Toronto Realty blog, I have 2 year-end posts. One is the top 5 real estate stories of the year, and the other is the top 5 blogs of the year, as chosen by me, which is kind of weird because I wrote them. But I figured that next week, so that'll be the 16th when we release that podcast, I'll probably do the top 5 real estate stories of the year. Having said that, we really are at the end of the year in terms of real estate sales and activity. Now, don't get me wrong. My team and I took on a very large project, which I'll explain in today's podcast, for which we have 15 properties to sell in Port Credit. And there are still new listings coming out. There are still sales happening. There is market activity. But there's nothing really burning right now that I wanted to discuss. So I figured we would do kind of a year in review, but from a behind the scenes standpoint. And now, bear with me here. Because when this was first proposed to me, Jonathan said to me, why don't you do a year in review from the standpoint of yourself, your team, your brokerage? And I thought, who's interested in that? For real. And then Jonathan said, well, look, people love real estate TV shows. And as we know, we being me and Jonathan and anybody who's actually in real estate, the shows are completely fake. And listen, I know you love $1 Million Listing and everything. They're fake. Yes, those are real people and they're real listings, but the shows are contrived and they're fake. And we've always talked about how if people actually saw what goes on behind the scenes, some people would be absolutely enthralled by it and some would find it boring because it's not as well produced. So the idea was proposed to me and I thought, you know what? It's not a bad one. And the more I got into it, the more I started to research, I thought, here's what we'll do. I'm going to give you a year in review through the eyes of myself on behalf of my team. And sort of behind the scenes of what is a very small 7-person real estate team. That's us. For those of you that don't know, I'm David Fleming, the broker of record of Bosley Toronto Realty Group. Bosley, of course, is a very large company. It's been around for 100 years, has 5 offices, hundreds of agents. We have our own little team called Bosley Toronto Realty Group. It's 5 real estate agents and 2 supports, Jonathan and Lindsay. And you'll learn much more about this as I go through today's podcast. Now, what is it like looking back at the year that we've had as I take out the glasses? So at the end of last year, and to some extent at the beginning of this year, all we were talking about was interest rates, inflation, and average home price. And don't get me wrong, people bought and people sold in 2023. Sales were the lowest of all time relative to population. I'll come back to that. But my point is, inflation, interest rates, and average home price dominated the headlines, and that's all people talked about. So behind the scenes, for me and my team, here's something interesting. Starting the year, the 7 of us were down to 5. That's right. Richard, who of course is semi-retired and we represent his business, myself, Chris Kancic, Matthew Morrison, and Tara Mina. We did not have marketing. We did not have our admin support, client care, operations, whatever you want to call it. Now, the funny thing about real estate is that it's incredibly cyclical. Agents come, agents go. And when you have teams, specifically, people come, people go. Now, over the years, I've worked with some fantastic individuals. In fact, we had somebody that was with us for 4 years and was so incredibly torn when she had to do what was best for her family and move on that she cried and said that we were her family. And I said, no, you have a baby. You have to go somewhere else and we're closer to home. So the point is, we were down a couple of people and that's how we started the year. You know, handicapped from the knees down, if you will. But that's the reality of real estate. And another funny thing, or not funny, I don't really know the word for it. I mentioned myself, Matt, Tara, and Chris. The 4 of us agents have been working together now for almost 5 years. That's really, really rare as far as real estate teams go. And some of you are thinking, I don't care, get on to the fun stories. But they don't show you this on TV. In the real estate TV shows. And in fact, if you were to look at real estate teams, I'm not talking about the guy on the bus with 30 people behind him and arms crossed. I'm talking about what we have, I've been told, is exceptionally rare. And I realized that. And so we started the year saying, what are we going to do from a business content perspective? I, as some of you know, if you have been reading Toronto Realty blog for a long time, made a very difficult decision to cut back from 3 blogs on Toronto Realty blog per week to 2. I've been writing 3 blogs a week since 2015. And I just couldn't do it anymore. So I cut back to 2. But I wanted to add a podcast, and we'll come back to that. I mean, obviously you're aware since you're listening to my podcast right now. So our goal obviously was to bring on a new marketing person who's not just making feature sheets, right? Somebody that can do everything. And then of course, bring on somebody that can work with us, transactions, client care. And let me tell you how hard it is to find the skill set, but also somebody that can, how do I put this, fit in with us because we're all crazy. So I started the year in January by looking at, of course, the data. Inflation for December came in at 3.4%. That was high. That was up from 3.1% in November. Unemployment was up to 5.8%, up from 5% to start 2023. And the interest rate, as we know, was at 5%. Now, in January, there was not a ton of real estate activity. I can say from the blog standpoint, I wrote a 3-part series to start the year called What's on Your Real Estate Mind for 2024. There were 7 things that I outlined: prices, sales and inventory, interest rates, immigration and housing, government's bright ideas, industry tinkering, and affordable housing. Now, if you look at prices, essentially what I wanted to know was, will at any point this year we see a monthly average home price surpass the high of $1,196,000 and change set in May of 2023? Now, the all-time high is $1,334,534, which I know off by heart because that was February of 2022. A lot of numbers, guys. What I'm saying is that, yes, we've rolled off the February 2022 peak, but the yearly high for 2023 was just shy of 1.2. Would we beat that? The answer, of course, is no. Now, the second thing I wanted to look at was sales and inventory, because we saw in 2023, 65,982 sales. 2 years prior, in 2021, we saw 122,000. So to put these numbers into perspective, those 65,982 sales were only 54% of the record 122,133 sales recorded in 2021. Those 65,982 sales were 8,000 lower than the next lowest figure, which was recorded 21 years ago. And those 65,982 sales were 26.6% lower than the average number of sales between 2002 and 2022. Now, the irony is, if you adjust for the population, I mean, I wrote this on my blog, it's unfathomable to see how few sales there were in 2023. So we went on and we started to talk about interest rates in January, and we came up with this idea for the Toronto Realty blog interest rate prediction game. I offered a free $200 gift card to Starbucks or Tim Hortons to anybody that wanted to post their predictions. Now, December 11th of this year, we will see the last Bank of Canada announcement, and we will be able to crown a winner. But it was very interesting because of the 20 some odd people that submitted guesses, 2 people said there won't be any cuts, and the guesses were all over the map. But we talked a lot about interest rates in January. And if I were to pick one story, because I'm going to go through monthly, one story from January is that I had an unbelievable listing in the beach that did just okay. And it was shocking. We listed this property. Every agent said it's amazing. Every agent said, wow, you're going to do so well. Every agent was throwing praise. And in the end, we only got 3 offers. And I believe we were 1,499. We sold for 1,625. And you might say, boo-hoo, you only had 3 offers. But the point is, we were just sort of warming up in this market. Now, in February, things changed significantly. So I wrote a blog on January 29th called Just Like That, It's a Seller's Market Again. And I referenced a bunch of different sales. And again, some people, sort of threw shade and said, well, you're cherry picking, you've only picked a handful. But that blog post, January 29th, I started to show this house got 15 offers, this house got 11 offers, this house got 12 offers, and so on. Now, inflation for January, that number came in February, okay, down 2.9%. Sorry, down to 2.9% from 3.4 in December. That's significant. It's the first time we saw sub 3%, and you all know where this is going. Now, another thing in February, we sold a house in the Upper Beach that was a holdover from the fall. I honestly can't remember the last time I had a fall listing that didn't sell in the fall, and we carried it over to the next year. But folks, that is the point I'm making about how tough the fall 2023 market was. It took us until February to move this house. And again, we took it off the market for December, as we always do with anything that's sitting around, but we sold this in February. Now, another thing happened in February. I bought a condo. And I wrote about it in a blog post called Putting My Money Where My Mouth Is. I decided to not just say to everybody, hey, I think we've hit market bottom. I went out, I bought a condo in King West, as I mentioned, and it went something like this. I looked at the condo and I said, I cannot believe they're really asking this price. I called the listing agent, a gentleman who I know. And he kind of sighed and he said, yes, we'll take that price. And I said, but? And he said, but don't lowball me. I said, why would anyone lowball you? You're at $499. Like you were at $569 in December. And he said, because he dropped it to $499, people are now making stupid offers, $460 and so on and so forth. This model, by the way, had sold for over $600,000 at the peak. So I pitched it to 3 different investors. All 3 of them said no. And I said, you know what? I'll buy it. And I did. Now, another thing happened in February that was indicative of where the market would go in the spring. We had a Mississauga listing. And I have a note here. It says, doing it right. How did we do it right? Oh, yeah. There was a listing. Get this. You're the seller and you're getting ready to go to market and your neighbor puts their house up 2 weeks before you. We didn't let that stop us. We looked at that and that house came out on the market and it had no marketing and no signage and it was offers anytime and it was not a great agent, et cetera, all the things wrong. We put our property out and we said, okay, is it possible to manipulate the market? Let's say that, actually I have my prices right here, if you will, but let's say that house sold for $950,000. And let's say our house is basically the same thing. How in the world can we get more than $950,000? Well, we did what we do, and I really don't know if I can explain that, but we ended up with 21 offers, and we sold this house for $1,090,000. I believe we were listed at $899. I can't remember. So February, 21 offers on a house in Mississauga, which was in really rough shape, by the way. And one final note I thought was funny I put here. The agent that sold it, the buyer agent, he stole my photos and they're watermarked Bosley Real Estate. He then put the property up for lease for his client, stole my photos, and then put the photos up. But what he didn't realize is that Treb watermarks them for you. So say he works for XYZ Real Estate. The photos now said XYZ Real Estate Inc. over top of Bosley Real Estate. And I thought, oh, he's going to notice that. But he didn't. And it went up on MLS and remained there for 42 days until it was leased. I'm embarrassed for him. But he's not embarrassed for himself. Now, another story. And this is the turning point in the market, so pay very close attention. In the fall of 2023, as I mentioned, it was a really bad fall. I was called in to a house in the Danforth Village. These gentlemen said they were on the market July, August, September. And it was an absolute bloodbath. It was awful, different strategies, nothing worked. And they said, what would you do? We're interviewing 6 agents. You know what? That's rare for me. I'll be honest, I'm blessed. A lot of people just come to me. I like your blog. I like your podcast. I don't really, quote unquote, compete for the business. But I really felt there was a good fit with these guys. And I said, here's what we'll do. We'll work together from now until whenever it is, January, February, March, April. And I sent them, because I'm a data nerd, I don't know if you know that, I sent them a lot of information on peaks, market peaks, peak prices, and said, we will find where the peak is. We'll do everything in advance. Let's meet with my stager. Let's have a plan going forward. They needed to rip out a wall in the basement. They had a half kitchen down there, which made absolutely no sense because there was no separate entrance. Long story short, they said, okay, David, let's do it. And we did, and we signed, and we were ready. And in about the second week of February, did I mention I'm a stats nerd? I had this spreadsheet with all of the offer nights and all of the prices, and I emailed them. I said, it's time. They said, great. My stager was in there 2 days later to stage. We were on the market 5 days after that. This property, guys, was on the market for $1,199,000 in the fall of 2023 and could not get a sniff of an offer. We ended up with 15 offers and sold it for $1,410,000. So part of it is me, but part of it's the market. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, we did a great job, but I'm not taking all the credit for that. The market had changed. So that was February. Let's move on to March. In March, we learned that February inflation was down to 2.8%. And we said, when's the first interest rate going to come? Well, it's not March 6th because March 6th passed by, and a lot of people thought maybe it would be. Some economists were starting to say we should start to see interest rates decline. And we had another listing, a couple, interestingly enough, that, as I said, will tell you kind of what was happening in the market in that time. We had a listing in Scarborough. You might say like, geez, David, don't you have a geographic farm area like every other agent in the 80s and 90s? No, we had the parents of a longtime client. And again, I met these guys, if you can believe this, in probably September of 2023. We said, here's what we're going to do, because they're in their 80s and they're downsizing. We're going to get everything out of your house. We're going to paint the whole house. We even put a ceiling in the half-finished basement downstairs. It took us months to get ready. And again, we timed the market. We, and by this I mean my team, and now they're going to be mad at me because they're going to be like, does every person now expect that we're doing this for them? We pulled up a truck and we loaded like 60 boxes of their stuff into our truck, because that's what we do. Chris would be like, yeah, great. We're the real estate agents that are also movers. But you know what? We do what it takes to get top dollar. And for these clients, and obviously based on their age and the situation, we filled a whole truck with their stuff. We listed their property. And in March, we got 11 offers. I keep saying, here's the funny thing. It's not funny. But this area was absolutely dead in the fall of 2023. And in January and February of 2024, same thing. Listings came, didn't do well. We took what I would call a Midtown Toronto or downtown Toronto style, which is, if you've ever heard me talk, we don't just list properties. We prepare them, we paint them, clean them, stage them, market them. And yes, we underpriced it and set an offer date, but we ended up with 12 offers. And they sold this house, listed at $899 for $1,210,000. And it was really cool because I brought my laptop over to my client's house. It was his parents, and we set it up on the TV because they needed to be able to see it. And we kind of went through all the offers, and they were very, very happy. And they ended up buying a small condo and downsizing. Now, another listing in March that's worth noting. This was another what I would call secondhand listing. I get a lot of these. This was out in the West End, and it backed onto power lines. And in 2023, it was on the market for 9 months with another agent. Again, part of it was that the market was better. Don't get me wrong, but we switched strategies. And I took this and said, listen, you need to get all your stuff out. Let us paint it. Let us clean it. Let us stage it. You have this fantastic basement. It's filled with crap and it's dirty. Let us stage it. And it backed onto the power lines. And the year before, this person was on the market for 9 months and couldn't sell. We got 12 offers. It sold for $1.1 million. And it too had been on the market for $999 unsold the prior year. So again, March, I'm not here to say that it was a month where I can brag about it and we did all these wonderful things. I'm saying that March, the market was busy. February, it was busy. March, it was busy. All good things come to an end. When the music stops, you'd better have a chair to sit down in. So let's move ahead to April. Now, April, the Bank of Canada announcement on April 10th, they didn't make an interest rate cut. And now you started to see people, and don't quote me on Benjamin Tal, but he's the one that's been saying we need to cut more and faster. And I don't know if he said it at the time, but some of the economists were starting to say, we really better do this soon, because there was no announcement scheduled for May. So now June would be the next possible date. Now, another fun listing that we had. This one was in Brampton. You guys, some of you must be saying, David, you just told us Mississauga, Etobicoke, Scarborough, and now Brampton. Well, listen, these are all the weird ones, right? And this was the parents of another client. Now, this house in particular was one of those, we haven't done a thing in 40 years houses. So if you have a house where nothing's been done in 40 years, on the one hand, you could itemize every single thing in the entire house, donate some things to charity, give things away, do a garage sale, sell things through Max Sold, give stuff away, or you could empty the entire house into a dumpster. Some people don't like the latter option. What's the expression here? Well, it's none of your beeswax. So in this situation, the clients put everything in a dumpster. And you know what? When you put stuff in a dumpster, the scavengers come anyways, and they take basically half of it. So everything went in a dumpster, and we put this on the market. And this was a house I sold in as-is condition. And I almost never do that. But for this particular house, we sold it in as-is condition because we had no idea what was wrong with this house. It was not in great shape. It had not been touched in a long time. And this one, folks, are you ready for this? 21 offers. Now, as I wrote in a blog post, and I'm not trying to throw shade at a certain type or geographic location of agent, but it was sold in as-is condition. And when I wrote the blog that accompanied this, and it was probably a month later, I said, I was amazed by the fact that when you put property sold in as-is condition on the listing, you put property is sold in as-is condition in your Schedule B, and when you explain in your offer instructions property is in as-is condition, the full text of which is with no representations or warranties, of the 21 offers, 20 of them contained representations and warranties.
It was fascinating. And I wrote about this in a blog. So if I'm talking too fast for people, let me flesh this out a little bit. You have a house and we are not warranting anything. The appliances, we're not saying if they work or not. We're not saying if they're in good shape. We're not saying that the furnace works or doesn't work. We're not saying the roof leaks or doesn't leak. It's as is condition. And we almost never do this. I don't think I've had an as is condition since that one on Cottingham. That was probably 2017. So suffice it to say, you make this abundantly clear. And agents will actually say to you, okay, awesome, I understand. Then they submit an offer. And it's full of clauses. The seller represents and warrants that the channels and fixtures are in good working order. The seller represents and warrants that the HVAC and mechanical and structural and plumbing works. The seller represents and warrants. So I already said this was in Brampton, so cat's out of the bag here. I said I wouldn't talk what about agents. But every single person that called, and I had over 100 calls on this property, and that's just calls. Think about the emails. They would call me and they'd say things like, how old's the roof? And I'd say, the property is being sold in as-is condition with no representations or warranties. And they'd say, right. So what can you tell me about the roof? And I'd say, the property is being sold in as-is. They go, no, I heard that. I just need some information from my client. And this went on and on and on. And people would call and I'd say, it's being sold in as-is condition with no representations or warranties. And they would say, can you tell me how old the furnace is? And it's not that I'm not doing my job. Based on the situation of these particular sellers and their family who's making the decision, and it's a power of attorney, and there's a lawyer involved, we're not making any representations or warranties. We're not bad people. We're just saying this is how it's being sold. In fact, usually you get less money if you're not making any representations or warranties. So for a savvy buyer, they might say this could be an opportunity. No one understood what that meant, except for the one agent that submitted an unconditional offer. And then the next day didn't show up with the check. Let's pause right there, just for effect, and I'll come right back. Welcome back. Now, before the break, I told you about this house in Brampton being sold in as-is condition with no representations or warranties, where 20 of the 21 people that made offers included all kinds of representations or warranties. I also mentioned, leaving you on somewhat of a cliffhanger, that the one successful bidder with the unconditional offer that happened to have the highest price did not show up the next day with the check. Now, for those of you that like a fight or are lawyers, you might say, well, I hope you stuck it to them. We actually didn't, because we're not looking for a 2-year battle. Almost save that for another day. We went to the second highest bidder. We said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to allow you to buy this house for this price with no condition in the next 6 hours. If you're not interested, we'll go to the next highest, and so on. And to that agent's credit, she said, okay. She improved her offer from what it was, came up to that price, took out the condition, took out the representations and warranties, and we had ourselves a deal. So I found it interesting that through the spring, I've now mentioned a few different properties. And again, we've sold over 100 properties this year, or done 100 transactions, let's say. The point I am making is this: the fun stories are often the outlandish ones. You'd be bored if I said we listed a condo for $499. It sat on the market and we got an offer for $470 and sold it for $485. No, the fun stories were about all of these different properties that had folks downsizing, or, unfortunately somebody passed away and it was an estate. And that continued through the spring, because it wasn't just that one there in the month of April. There is another one, which I'll talk about in a moment. So a couple other fun things in April. I sold a house to clients I've been working with for 4.5 years. Now, the irony is, it wasn't anything they did or didn't do, or I did or didn't do. It just took that long. And I looked it up, and we had made 3 different offers. And they were all about 9 months apart. It was just really tough. And they finally bought. And that, to me, was an amazing story, which unfortunately, in the context of today's podcast, is merely a footnote. Now, I wrote a blog post about a development by Freed for a hotel where prices were upwards of $2,400 per square foot in pre-construction. And I wrote about how insane this was. Now, this, to me, in April of 2024, was the beginning of the conversation about pre-con being dead. And over the next few months, I won't give you the specifics because this could go on and on, we saw newspaper articles and real hard data from companies like Urbanation, which talked about pre-con sales dropping off a cliff, down 90% year over year, or 90% from the 10-year average. And effectively what it came down to, as I explained in Toronto Realty blog, it's too expensive to build right now. I wrote many blog posts throughout the course of 2024 about how I feel The 25 to 30% of the price of new construction that's made up from taxes is the real culprit. But of course, labor's more expensive and materials are more expensive and it takes longer. And this was a theme throughout the year. But when we saw this Freed Hotel start at, I have here $2,354 per square foot. This was the blog post that I wrote that to me started the beginning of conversations about pre-con being dead. And again, I've never sold pre-con for a multitude of reasons, but there is going to be an absolute death knell in this year and next for pre-con sales, which will, of course, represent in a major deficit of condo completions 4 to 5 years out. Now, another footnote here. I had a listing in the West End. I put it up for $799 under listing, 3 units in the building, thinking it'll never work. I was hoping for $850. We got an offer for $962. That was fun. Sometimes you don't know if you don't try. And the clients were very, very happy about that. And I mentioned that there would be more about estate sales. With a massive house, this one was interesting because there were 5 siblings, 5 heirs, and they all had different ideas about what to do with the house. I started working on this in December of 2023, and we didn't go to market until June. But in April, we started to clear out the house. We hired kids from the Leaside High School football team to throw stuff in a dumpster for an hourly rate. We hired Max Sold to auction stuff off, and it was a fascinating experience. Now let's move on to May, because May 22nd, 2024, something amazing happened. It was the debut of the Last Honest Realtor. Now, in case I didn't mention this in previous podcasts, I did a pilot for HGTV back in 2010 or 2011 for a show that would be called The Last Honest Realtor. Cat out of the bag. And I figured, hey, listen, it's been 13 years. I like that title. And it's just obnoxious enough that initially people are all going to say, I cannot believe this guy's calling himself The Last Honest Realtor. And the pushback to that initial podcast was brutal. It was brutal. 30, 40 comments slandering me about calling myself The Last Honest Realtor. It's supposed to be tongue in cheek. And yes, I did gloss over the fact that I did a pilot for an HGTV show. Oh my God, 13 years ago. Wow, that was a time. So we started the podcast. It was great. Jonathan, who I reference off camera, started with us, I think, in February. Lindsay came on in April as our transactions and client care coordinator. And the team was working really well. Again, myself, Chris, Matt, Tara, 4 agents. We see more of each other than we do of our own family. I kid you not. Yeah, it's wild. We live together in this building. So we're in May. We've got the Last Honest Realtor. I went outside. I took a real smarmy photo, which I put up, and then everyone was like, this is a weird photo. And I think you might have seen it if you're watching this somewhere. Someone said something, I don't think I can repeat this, that I look like I want to bleep, you bleep, something, something. Anyways, it was supposed to be like, let's call it the Last Honest Realtor, and I'll look kind of smarmy, but that's not really what I look like. So the very first podcast, I only got 303 views, but it was about how I got started in the business. And I thought, yeah, this would be really fun, and no one really cared. What we've learned over the last little while is that certain posts are just going to get more attention because they show up in feeds, something about interest rates or market crashing or what have you. But some of the best podcasts I've done have had the fewest views. I did one that was called My Real Estate Journey, and one of my cousins listened to it, and he's like, man, you cry a lot. I was like, what? He goes, you told the story about your real estate journey. Every time you made an offer on a property, you called your dad and cried. That was a fun one. So the market really peaked in May. And I referenced this one house. We listed for $1,499,000 and we sold, and the clients, and they actually said to me, we're nuts. I don't think they're listening to this. They're both very busy, but they said, oh, we're nuts. So like, guys, you guys are nuts. And you admitted it, but they wanted 1.7 million for this house. And when I first met them, I was like, you're not getting 1.7 million. And they're like, we're getting 1.7 or we're not selling. And I was like, they are not getting 1.7. And we didn't get 1.7. We got 1.855 in what was the craziest sale of the year for me on the listing side. And I said to the clients, call them Bob and Susie, said, Bob and Susie, at the end of the year, when we look back, I want you to remember the day that you sold because that was the peak of the market. And you know what? It was. Now that same week, I had a house that was another project. It was an estate. Actually, no, it wasn't an estate. I apologize. the mother went into a home, but it was a very similar situation. It was, I've got a plan. Let's paint everything white, cheap and cheerful, paint and lighting. And we painted everything white and we changed all the lighting and it was a lot of work. And then we staged it. She was hoping for 1.3. We listed at $999. She didn't get 1.3. She got a bully offer for 1.4. This was the market in May, guys. And then my most impressive sale was a condo downtown listed at $1.2 million. Now, how do I say that this thing was not a great piece of real estate without saying that? It wasn't a loft. It wasn't brick and beam. It wasn't cool. It was just a condo. We listed at 1.2 and we got 1,175. And why this is so amazing is because that was in mid-May. If I had this listing in August, September, October, November, December, impossible to sell. That's how the market changed. So post May 24, the market drops off a cliff. And between May and June, I start charting all of the sales on the east side where I have 2 listings coming out in the month of June. So picture this. I have a Google spreadsheet. Spreadsheet. That's how passionate I am about it right now. And I'm sharing it with 2 different sets of clients. Every listing that comes out on the east side, I put it in the sheet, I put in their offer date, and I update it constantly. Now, this is leading up to 2 listings. The first week, 25%. No, sorry, excuse me. The first week, 35%. I remember this exactly because it goes down 10% a week. 35% of offer dates are working, which means resulting in a sale. Now, that's very low. I just told you about a property that was listed at 1,499 that we sold for 1,855. That was the peak of the market, and that was in the first week of May. How is it possible that in June, only 35% of offer nights are working? The following week, 25%. The following week, 15%. Do the math, guys. For every 100 listings that come out, 85 of those offer nights are failing and the properties are coming right back onto the market. So sure enough, we listed these 2 properties, both of them underlisted for multiple offers. Both of them failed on offer nights. Now, one of them, we left it up there for 2 days. And some people don't like when we do that. It's 1,199, offers on a Tuesday. And by Thursday, it still says 1,199. It still says offers reviewed on. But in my defense, I can't force a seller to sign a price change or a relist or cancellation. We ended up selling that property for $1,370,000. So you say, oh, 170 over list, not in competition, right? Sure. But maybe that buyer thought, oh, this could have sold for 1.4 or 1.45 if it was done previously. Look, it's hard to time a market. And some people think June is the best time to sell. And these 2 particular sellers, one of them thought June was the best time to sell. And one of them just happened to get a job transfer and need to sell in the month of June. But that was the freehold market, guys, the freehold market. And it was impossible to sell. And we got rid of those 2 listings. And I have a colleague who shall remain nameless. And he or she had a listing that was out at the same time as mine. And he or she's listing ended up selling in November. It was tough. So also in June 5th, first interest rate cut by the Bank of Canada, 25 basis points. Very cool. We had a multiplex. This is a fun one. It was an 8-plex. It was on the market for 5 weeks. We finally got an offer, and then we got 5 more offers. I keep saying it's funny, but this is kind of funny or amusing or interesting in different market segments. This particular segment for an 8-plex over $3 million, every investor just sits and waits. And sure enough, an offer comes in and they all act. 6 offers. That was crazy. So in June, I also wrote a 2-part blog series, Selling Your Parents' Home, The Trials and Tribulations, because I explained all of the things that I had learned throughout the year. And I mentioned that we had sold multiple properties on behalf of parents. Some of these kids, if you will, in their 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s in some of these cases had inherited a house from parents who passed away. Some of them were selling it as a power of attorney, and some of them were just selling it for mom and dad because mom and dad were busy. And that was a blog post that I ended up putting in our Insights magazine, which we mail out to our clients every September. So in July, the market slows down. June inflation comes in at 2.7%, down from 2.9. July 24th, the Bank of Canada cuts the overnight lending rate again by 25 basis points. We're now down to 4.5. And then I write a scathing blog post about something called a home equity tax. I've been written so many scathing blog posts this year. People accuse me of getting calmer in my old age. Someone once said, it's amazing. I started reading your blog in 2007. You used to write about not getting into the nightclub because you're wearing the wrong shoes. Now you write about not getting into the kids' playpen because they're not wearing the right socks. It's true. If you go to Gymboree, you have to wear the right socks. And if you don't bring them, you have to buy a new pair. Ask any parent. They've got 8 pairs of these darn things. So that's kind of funny. August comes along. The market is slow. Now, July inflation comes in August at 2.5%, down from 2.7. And I'm in this boardroom. I'm going nuts at 2.5. And I'm talking about how we are going to have a crazy, crazy fall, which of course we didn't. Now, it's an exceptionally slow month. Very few deals on our board. Lots of leases. Matt and Tara, of course, September 1st is a very big lease date. And it was a very uneventful month except for TRB, because I bought another condo in the month of August. I did a 2-part blog series called Putting My Money Where My Mouth Is Again, where I wrote famously something of 6,000, 7,000 words. And then after that, I wrote a 2-part blog series, How Do You Evaluate a Toronto Investment Condo? This one's fun because Google clearly loves it. I talked about how when I set out to buy this property, I didn't really set out to buy it, I just saw it. And then I looked at every property on the east side at $499,000. And over the course of 2 blog posts, I ranked all of these properties according to things like their maintenance fees, their location, the age of the building, the condition of the unit, the relative value or what the person paid. And I put a note here. I said 5 people emailed me after reading that blog post and said, I read your blog post. I want to buy an investment condo. How many of the 5 have bought so far? 1. Now, 1 of them I'm still in touch with. 3 of them, kind of dropped off. But a lot of people had this idea. And because I'm in the industry, obviously, I wouldn't say I'm more risk averse, but I certainly have an edge. I bought 2 condos this year. I think that a lot of people read what I wrote and said, wow, this all sounds really good. I'd love to do this. But when push comes to shove, man, based on the fact that it's not the most liquid asset and based on the transaction costs involved, land transfer tax, real estate fees, and based on how hard it is to get a problem tenant out, I think a lot of people just said, maybe I'll put my money in a real estate investment trust. So now we're into September. Summer's over. It was slow. And on September 4th, which is the day after Labor Day, the Bank of Canada makes another announcement, cutting 25 basis points for the 3rd time. We're now down to 4.25% from a 5% rate where we started the year. We're all expecting a busy fall market. Now, August inflation comes in at 2%, which is at target. And by at target, I mean every central bank in the world is looking for a 2% inflation rate. But it's down from 2.5% in July. How did you go from 2.9, 2.8, 2.7, 2.5 to 2? Call me a nerd, but I remember where I was when this happened. This is my moon landing or my JFK moment. I was in the car driving on Richmond, cursing Toronto traffic, when I heard on the radio, inflation came in at 2%. And I thought, that's not right. Someone's reading that improperly. And I raced back to the office to find out it was. Now, the reason I make a big deal of that, of course, is because in September, we also learned that unemployment peaked at 6.6% in August. So you have inflation at target, you have unemployment peaking, and the writing's on the wall. Now, I thought that this meant that buyers would get out in full force. At this point, I've bought 2 condos. At this point, the Bank of Canada has cut the rate 3 times. We have inflation at target. We have unemployment at peak. And guess what? The fall market has been kind of slow. I started to write on my blog, and this is probably into October. I believe that 80 to 90% of buyers do not want to buy until the rates are at their fingers. What I mean is that 10 to 20% of buyers will say, wow, interest rates are declining. And I know that in 6 to 9 months, they will be way lower. So I'll buy now ahead of the price increases and I'll pay a little bit more, but boy, will I be happy in 6 to 9 months. That's what I learned this fall. And I remember standing on Besborough Drive with a set of buyers having this exact conversation. And one of my clients said, yeah, it's a no-brainer. But unfortunately, I really do think that a lot of buyers are going to wait until the rates are lower in May or June of next year, and prices will be 10% higher. So September, we routed a ton of listings, and they all sat. Some of them moved. I mean, we had one that was out at Leslie and I want to say York Mills, somewhere in there. We had 6 offers. It sold. It was a relist. We inherited this from another agent. We did a really good job. But it was a sluggish market. And a couple of blog posts of note, my top 10 questions for the fall market: interest rates, inflation, average home price, sales, inventory. Will there be demand? Who wants to sell versus who needs to sell? Where's the condo market going? What about resale condos? Will we see an increase in affordability? I don't want to sound unoriginal, but there was a lot of the same themes in September. So sluggish market, lots of condo listings, buyers are waiting for inventory, and we get into October. October, we see the inflation figure for September is down to 1.6%. We're now below target, and to me, that's ridiculous. No question, this influenced the October 23rd Bank of Canada interest rate announcement, where they cut 50 basis points. 4 cuts, now down from 5% to 3.75. So the market starts to round into form. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to quote Chris here because he had an interesting line. He said, "We're so used to seeing a condo listing either sell on the offer night or sell in the first few days or sell 10 to 11 days. We just have to expect that they're going to sell on day 40. And I said to him, I don't understand who goes and views the condo on day 37, then makes the offer on day 40. And he said, people. And you know what? He was right. Because we had September condo listings that sold in October with 35, 36, 42, and 45 days on the market. September listings sold in October. And like, we didn't do terribly on these, right? Like 685 on 699.9. Okay. And I was amazed because I just put myself in the mind of the buyer. Property comes out on MLS. I like it. I'm going to go see it. I'm going to decide. But there was just so much inventory, and specifically in the condo market where it was really hard to move stuff, that is what, when I say, the market rounded into form, that is what we started to experience. Now, we had a really tricky listing. It was in the market since June. It sold in October, but there was nothing for buyers out there. And that to me was the story of the October market. Now, in November, and I will say this, I sold a house over the weekend to clients that in their particular area, we've been looking since April. And I said in August, the fall will be very busy. Now, let's say they're looking for a 4-bed, 4-bath, detached, and that's it in their particular area. You would think, there's going to be a ton of those. Well, listen, the basement's only half excavated, so that doesn't work, or it's on the busy street, so that doesn't work. I said to them, you're going to have 3 options per month, September, October, November, 9 total houses. The house I sold them, which I think was November 30th or 29th, this represented the second house on which they had bid in the fall market. They only saw 2 houses in 3 months that they wanted to buy. Now, cry me a river because it's $3 million. Guys, take that out of the equation for a moment and just think about what I call quality inventory. And I wrote a blog in the month of November called Quality Listings. What if there was a metric called Quality Listings? If you were to take all of the listings and filter out the garbage, filter out the condo assignments, filter out the relists, filter out the properties that have been listed over and over or that are listed at prices people won't accept, filter it all out, there's never been less quality inventory. And Treb does have a metric for the relist share. And the relists in the fall were around 1/3. So 1 out of every 3 new listings was actually a retread. So I just didn't see quality inventory. And I had a lot of buyers, in fact, Matt, Tara, Chris, and in the end, a lot of buyers bought. But in the end, I just said that twice, by the end, which is, to be honest, now, because it's December, we've got a lot of buyers who did not purchase, who were very active. I have one set of buyers, they're parents of a client. We made an offer when I was in Idaho, so that would have been the 3rd week of August. And it didn't get accepted, and they didn't want to pay the price, and they kind of thought maybe it's not for us. And I said, guys, the fall market's coming. Ask me how many offers they made September, October, November. 0. They did not find another house that they liked. Quality inventory was non-existent. So that's the month of October. And interest rates decreasing, the buyers should be out there, they're not. There's not a lot of quality inventory. Another interesting tidbit, what happened in October, I had an opportunity that was very new to me and very unique. There is a fantastic development out in Port Credit, an enclave of homes, and they're all done. They're all built. And I was asked if I'd be interested in discussing representing the site. Now, over the years, I have made my feelings on pre-construction known. But this was different, not just because of the quality, but because of the fact that they were already done. Who does that? What kind of developer finishes the product? And, tell me that I don't want to say tell me that I'm selling out, but like, what's a better word for this? Tell me thou doth protest too much. But we went and met, and I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me. And I was so incredibly impressed by this one thing that they said. We don't view real estate as a commodity to be bought and flipped and traded and assigned. We build for end users. We're not selling price per square foot. And we saw eye to eye on everything. And these properties were so impressive that I said to my team, we're going to do this. We're going to take on this site. And we now are the agent and the team that represents the lake house in Port Credit. And I'm not here to pitch it today, but I'll describe it. It's 17 townhomes, all of which are absolute luxury. They're beautiful. They're finished. You can walk through them, touch them, feel them. And this is the problem I always had with pre-construction, is that you're buying a wish. But these are done. And it just feels like Blue Mountain, Aspen. It feels like a bit of a kind of ski chalet vibe. Some of them back onto the ravine. Some of them have backyards. They're beautiful. And I think it's such a cool opportunity. Now, that was October through November. And if I could continue through November, inflation comes in at 2%, up from 1.6. No big deal. And then I start to have some really good buyer experiences. I bought a house for a buyer for $1,960,000 on a 2.1 list. When do you get to do that? That was so cool. We sold a condo listing that had been on the market for 2 months. And we dropped the price from $699 to $679. And normally I would say, who didn't see the listing at $699 that's going to see it at $679? Well, guess what? Someone did, and they bought it. They lowballed us at $650. We sold it for $675, I think. Jonathan approached me in late November and said, congratulations, you've done 26 podcasts. Statistically, what is the number?
Less than 1%.
Okay, so take it from there, okay, and go. Jonathan approached me in late November and said, congratulations, you've done your 26 podcasts. And I said, what, 26? That's kind of random. He said, well, statistically, less than 1% of people that start podcasts get to this number. And I said, that's cool, but why 26? So that was a fun experience. Now, I had another fun experience with a closing, another one-off, another this has never happened before. And it's a blog I'll probably write for next year, but I'll give you the long and short of it. A client of mine bought a house from a seller who clearly had financial problems, and their mortgage needed to be paid off before they could close. So they said, no problem. Hey, David, could you just tell your buyer to sign the deposit over to us directly the day before closing so that we can discharge our mortgage? And I said, no. And they said, well, you're going to have to, or we can't close. And I said, well, and they said, but you don't have time to run it by their lawyer. You need to do it right now. It was crazy town. And I'm going to write about this at length for a blog in January. The deal closed 3 days after it was scheduled to, and it was a first. But as our in-house legal counsel explained to everybody at the company during one of our information sessions, you can look up any property and see how much is owing on it. Because if someone sells a property for $1 million, but there's $1.2 million owing to a bank and a private lender, you might have an issue. So that just about catches us up. We're in the first week of December. I mentioned the market slowed down, and you might say, well, what really happens behind the scenes with an agent, with a team, with a brokerage? In the month of December, is it slow? Are you just sitting around? Well, believe it or not, once upon a time, that would be accurate. And when I met my wife 13, 14 years ago, we had this joke about how real estate in December was just sitting at your desk and drinking coffee and writing Christmas cards. That was then, this is now, and we are, without exaggeration, about as busy as we've been this year. And just to give you an example, and maybe it's because my team and I are crazy, but we write our own Christmas cards by hand. My team has agreed to do it because I have forced them to. No, seriously, I hand address all of my envelopes and I write all my own cards because who wants to get a card that an assistant wrote or that somebody printed? We have that. We make our own Christmas baskets. Have you ever seen what's in a Christmas basket? It's like 90% stuffing. And to the clients who have purchased this year and we're sending them Christmas baskets, we decided why not invite that into our world? And David's entire basement is filled with stuff for the baskets. We have a Christmas skate. December 21st, you should come. And that's at St. Mike's. It's 2 hours. It's for families or anybody else if you want to come, and we're preparing for that. We also have our Pass the Puck referral contest. Yes, you can win. Sounds kind of salesy, but what the heck. You can win a night out in Toronto, go to a Leafs game, stay at the Ritz-Carlton, and go out for dinner by referring a friend or family member who's looking to transact next year. That was Tara's idea, and the whole team is doing it. Now, did I mention the lake house? Oh yeah, that's right. We decided at the end of November and into December to take on a project and attempt to sell 15 luxury townhomes in Port Credit. Now we have, of course, the rate cut that's coming on December 11th. I'm writing year-end content for Toronto Realty blog. There is so much happening in the month of December. And no, not a lot of it has to do with the actual selling of real estate, but I wouldn't be surprised if people assumed the month of December's got to be dead slow in real estate offices. What's happening out there right now, yeah, it probably is very slow. But for my team and I, we're always busy. And whether we're writing Christmas cards, whether we're creating Christmas baskets, seriously, silver paint pen on a red envelope, that's my jam. I do that. And all of these year-end activities with our Christmas skate, we've got a couple Christmas parties, etc. It keeps us on our toes. And we will have a couple weeks off at Christmas to get reinvigorated and refreshed for that new year ahead. So folks, that is our year in review. I hope you enjoyed the behind-the-scenes look at what really goes on with myself, my team, and the Toronto Realty Group. We'll be back for one last podcast next week here on the Last Honest Realtor.